2,500 years after it was first built, the Parthenon still dominates the skyline. But there are many unexplained mysteries, of which thousands of visitors are unaware. One of its most intriguing aspects is its design. It was created as an optical illusion. It appears to consist of straight lines, but in fact, almost every surface is built to lean and curve, from its columns to its foundations. But that's not the Parthenon's only hidden treasure. In fact, most of them are no longer on the Acropolis. In the British Museum, there are many of the sculptures which once adorned the Parthenon.
The fact that they survive as well as they do has given us a unique insight into the best that ancient Greek sculptors could produce at the best period of Greek art.
But the most precious of all the Parthenon's riches may have laid within the temple, and yet no trace of it remains. But there are clues to what it may have held in the most unlikely of places. In Nashville, Tennessee, artists have recreated something that could provide the key to the purpose of the entire temple. The genius behind the Parthenon was one of the greatest Athenian statesmen of all time and the father of democracy, Pericles. The aim of his building program on the Acropolis was to make Athens the center of the Greek world. Work began in 447 BC. His plans for the Parthenon would require the efforts of hundreds of craftsmen and take years to complete. Exactly how the structure was built has remained a mystery for centuries. Today, the Parthenon is still the focus of intense building activity. It can give us a crucial insight into the original methods of the ancient Greeks. Every morning, stonemasons, sculptors and architects arrive to work on the site. Their aim now is not construction, but restoration. Since 1986, they've repaired columns and started to rebuild the internal walls. Using modern machines along with ancient techniques, they're working to conserve the existing structure of the building and to restore its fabric. But it's a painstaking process. Professor Manolis Kores has been involved in the restoration work at the Parthenon for 15 years.
In the current restoration project, we're using, roughly speaking, same methods as the ancient builders, and also the tools we're using are basically the same as in ancient times, at least for finishing the surfaces.
But the story of the construction of the temple begins 16 kilometers away. Here in the mountains surrounding Athens, the most important raw material needed to build the Parthenon was found: marble. It was quarried east of Athens on Mount Pendele, and one of the original quarries still survives. It was the first time marble had been used on such a large scale and for the entire superstructure of a building. Jim Coulton is an expert in the building techniques and tools of the ancient Greeks and has studied the methods they used for quarrying marble.
The quarry is an unusually deep one, as the high face shows, because the area where high-grade blocks was available was quite restricted, and the amount that was needed for the Parthenon was very considerable.
The Athenian builders needed nearly 7,500 blocks, some over 4 meters long. Before the construction of the Parthenon could even begin, the ancient Greeks had to see if the nearby mountains were capable of supplying the amount of marble they would need. Once the research was finished, quarrying began. This limestone quarry south of Athens, dating from around 400 BC, gives us an important insight into the quarrying techniques of the ancient Greeks.
The bottom of the great quarry on Mount Pendeli would probably have looked much like this if we were able to see what was beneath the piles of marble chips. You can see here very clearly the grooves which mark where specific blocks were cut off to the size that had been ordered, and over in the corner there you can see one block that's been separated out by channels ready to be removed.
The blocks were cut with their final position on the building in mind. There was a major advantage with this accuracy: weight. The smaller the blocks, the easier they were to transport from the quarry to the Acropolis. In the 21st century, transportation is less difficult, so size is no longer a problem. The use of modern machines has meant that quarrying has become much less precise. Here at the Dionyso quarry, also on the mountain of Pendeli, the marble for the restoration of the Parthenon is being quarried. Once the larger blocks of marble are cut from the mountain, smaller sections are carved using power drills. Although for the ancient Greeks quarrying would have been a much more labor-intensive task, they would still recognize some of the tools and methods used today. This pointed pick hammer would have been used 2,500 years ago to cut the channel around the mass the quarryman needed to detach from the mountain. Wedges and iron splints would then have been hammered in with heavy mallets to split the block away from the parent rock. After the block had been prized apart from the mountain, it was the job of the most experienced quarrymen to cut away the larger, unnecessary pieces of marble. It was only when the marble had been carved into half-finished form and inspected for quality by the quarry foreman that it was ready to begin its perilous journey down the mountain to the Parthenon. The marble blocks weighed between 5 and 12 tons. Moving them was a task which required huge technical and organizational expertise. The mystery is, where did the Athenians gain these vital skills? The answer lies in the very foundations of the Parthenon itself. The building we see now dates from around 440 BC, but some of the blocks, and indeed the foundations themselves, are 30 years older. It seems that the Parthenon wasn't the first building to occupy this site. In fact, an earlier temple was begun here to commemorate one of the greatest military victories in Greek history. It's still remembered today in one of the most grueling athletic events. In August 490 BC, the Persians arrived at Marathon in Greece to seek revenge on their age-old enemies, the Athenians. Today, Marathon is a small modern town, but there are still traces of the ancient battle that took place there. This mound on the outskirts of the town is the grave of the Athenian soldiers who lost their lives in the fighting. Although they were heavily outnumbered, they charged the Persian lines, breaking their ranks and cutting them to pieces. They killed 6,400 Persians, while losing only 192 of their own men. The story relates that when the battle was won, an Athenian soldier ran all the way back to Athens, a journey of over 26 miles, or 41 kilometers, to report the news. When he arrived, he was so exhausted that he could only utter one word, victory, before falling down dead. It's from this event that the modern marathon is believed to have originated. The Athenians' victory seemed like a divinely inspired miracle and almost immediately passed into legend. They attributed their success to the Greek goddess of war, Athena, and they began to erect a temple dedicated to her. But the building was never to be completed. In 480 BC, while it was still under construction, the Persians, nursing memories of their humiliating defeat, returned with a vengeance. They stormed the Acropolis, murdered all the Athenians who had stayed there to defend it, and set fire to the scaffolding around the incomplete temple. The tremendous heat fractured virtually every stone that had been set in place, and the temple was destroyed. Work on rebuilding the Parthenon under Pericles didn't begin again until 30 years later, but the techniques used to construct such a building had already been tested. The Athenians were now well aware of the procedures necessary to move heavy blocks of marble from the quarry and transport them to the Acropolis. The block was first loaded onto a sledge using huge levers. It was then ready to be winched out of the quarry. Quarrymen attached 2 ropes to the sledge at one end and wrapped the other end around the wooden axles of 2 massive winches near the quarry entrance. The rope had to be long and extremely powerful.
The ropes used would obviously have been of natural fibres. The fibres available would certainly include flax, linen ropes, and also papyrus, which could be imported from Egypt.
At the time, Athens was the head of a great empire. She commanded a brilliant army and substantial navy. Her long-standing shipping traditions meant that the Greeks were experts at rope construction long before the Parthenon was ever built. It would have taken probably the best part of a day to drag the marble to the entrance of the Pendeli quarry, but it was a lot easier for it then to make the descent down the mountain to the loading platform below. The original flagstone road still survives. It was built with a uniform slope in order to make the block's descent as smooth as possible.
The main problem for this part of the journey was to stop the block going too fast rather than to make it go at all.
The long, hot days of summer provided the best conditions for transporting the marble from the quarry to the Acropolis. Wagons pulled by oxen and loaded with huge blocks would have made their way down this road, now one of the busiest streets in modern Athens. Only if the road had been dried hard by the sun could it withstand the weight of the wagon, oxen and stone. At the end of a journey that would have taken about 5 hours lay the biggest